few of you are wishing that you didn't have to remember physics and chemistry class right now. But you sit in a lecture hall and you memorize facts and figures and elements and natural laws, and you get all these sort of things stored up into your mind, and then you'd have to walk down the hall to a lab class, right? And you'd spend time practicing what you learned, applying all of those things that you memorized in real time, observing how all those theories work themselves out in the real world. And sometimes those experiments would go exactly as you had planned. And then other times they would combust and blow up in your faith and send you ducking for cover. And that is exactly how it is in our faith journey too. I was thinking, a lot of us, we surrender our lives to Jesus and we get all fired up, passionate about who he is and what makes his heart beat fast and how he would call us to live, who he's calling us to become. And then we go home to the laboratory and things start getting mixed together in the real world. And tempers flare, and opinions get shared, and expectations don't get met, and your uncle finds out who you voted for, and hopes and dreams and all those sorts of things get factored in. And sometimes that experiment works out just as we had hoped, and other times it blows up right before our very eyes. But in either case, I want you to hear this, especially this Christmas season. God is not asking you to go to work on your family's life. He's not asking you to focus on your mom or your dad or your sister-in-law or your ex-husband. He's not concerned about you developing their character. God is asking you to do one thing, I think this Christmas, do one thing. To work on your character. To work on your life. There's a quote that I keep in my office. I really don't know who this is attributed to, but I love it. I read it all the time. It says, other people don't create your spirit. They reveal your spirit. Difficult people reveal the true condition of your heart. It's kind of like the guy who bought his mother-in-law a cemetery plot for Christmas one year. You heard about this guy? Yeah, I think he's probably dead himself. But bought his mother-in-law a cemetery plot, and then the next year he didn't buy her anything at all. His mother-in-law got all bent out of shape about that. Really argued with him why you didn't buy me anything this year for Christmas. And he looked at her and said, because you still haven't used the gift I bought you last year. Right? Difficult people reveal the true condition of your heart. And the next 2 weeks are potentially going to be the most busy and potentially most joy-filled, but also the most relationally complex of our entire year. So in the time that we have together here today, I just want to take some time, before we move into this next, especially 7 days towards Christmas, but even the next 2 weeks before New Year's, just to kind of pause, settle a minute, and talk a bit about how we can approach this next week, 2 weeks, each day, as we head towards a holiday party, before we buy our mother-in-law a cemetery plot, and just understand how we can survive it and still like our family. Or maybe for some of you, it's how to still be liked by your family. Before we speak up or lash out or make a verbal jab, to just ask ourselves a few questions. And this is what I hope you'll do next 10 days. Just ask yourself these questions every day. What's going on in my heart? Who's calling the shots? And what will people see in you? I had a buddy who called me this last week. And he just said to me, just honestly, he said, pray for me, man. It's the holidays and my family is driving me wild. And I thought about these 3 questions that we're going to talk about here the rest of our time tonight. I thought about him, and I thought, he'd be really good right now if he just would ask himself these 3 questions. What's going on in my heart? Who's going to call the shots in my life? What do I really want people to see in me? Because you're going to walk into a family party, and you're going to be challenged by a sibling or an ex-husband or a parent. And this first question is a super important one. I just want you to ask this week, what's really going on in my heart? What's going on in my heart? What's in me? What expectation or disappointment or hope or insecurity is being revealed in my spirit because of some situation that's out of my control? What's really going on in my heart these days? The truth is, all of us, when we get squeezed by life, all of us are bound to have something that comes pouring out. In fact, Jesus said, we talked about this several weeks ago, Jesus said, for the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. And while the temptation is to pick up a magnifying glass and try to expose everyone else's faults around us, what we really need to do is take a long look at the man or the woman in the mirror and realize, as Emerson Eggers has said, he's written great books on marriage. He said this, he said, "My response is my responsibility." Would you just say that out loud with me? This will be a super liberating moment for you. Say this with me. My response is my responsibility. Man, just make that your motto this Christmas. If we would memorize that one phrase, just think about the countless number of arguments this holiday season that we would avoid. My response is my responsibility. And I don't know about you, but I really want to erase my name from anybody's difficult people list. I just really don't ever want to be that guy who people think, oh man, Josh is coming over. Great. Like we talked about earlier this fall, rather than being people who take life from others, we got to be the kind of people who take responsibility for our life and add value to others. I've always appreciated what the Apostle Paul wrote to some Jesus followers in Rome. He said this, he said, "Don't repay anyone evil for evil." Think about these words. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. And if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everybody. Another translation says, do all that you can to live at peace with everyone. And you know, the point that Paul's driving at is that sometimes the wisest, most helpful thing to do can also be the most difficult. That is to believe the very best in another person and choose the most generous response to their actions. You know, it's my experience that very few people operate in the as far as it depends upon me zone. Often, instead, we live in the land of as long as it's easy and as long as I get what I want. Now think about what causes relational tension in your life. So often, it's real simple. It's just, at the end of the day, it's our ego, right? I mean, we live from a perspective that says, as long as it depends, as far as it depends on everyone else, they can figure out how to be at peace with me. I mean, think about the last time that you were at odds with someone. That fight that you had with a boyfriend, or your mom, or your dad, or the last time that you just laid into someone behind the counter. You wanted something and you didn't get it. And that was a killer to your pride. And before you knew it, you were digging in or putting up a wall or storming out of the house to get ice. That's why James wrote, God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. God gives grace to humble people. God's grace flows out of humble people. You know, I heard humility described this week with a phrase that I just love. I've never heard this before. Described as resting in Christ. That's really what humility is. It's this discipline of our heart. When we ask the question, what's going on in my heart these days? It's the discipline of our inner life in which we learn more and more how to be at rest, how to be content, as Casey taught us last weekend. How to be content with Jesus and Jesus alone. It's a heart that can say, as the psalmist wrote, you, O Lord, you are all that I have, and you give me all that I need. I love that. It means choosing a posture in which we drop our pride and our ego, and when we do, we actually escape this whirlwind of emotions of needing more control, or needing to be right, or needing to have the last word, and choosing instead to put our trust in God. To just be still and to be at rest in Him. Trusting Him to do immeasurably more in a situation than we could ever do on our own. Relying on Him to provide for our emotional needs. And it doesn't mean humility. It doesn't mean, not thinking of yourself. I love how C.S. Lewis put this. C.S. Lewis said, it doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It just means thinking of yourself a little less. Moving from a life that's self-preoccupied and self-infatuated and self-exalting to a life that is others-occupied and others-infatuated and others-exalting. And if you want to experience a little bit more of that in your life this Christmas, we just start with this question. And what's going on in my heart? What's in there that with God's help this week, this day, I need to go after this right now? Maybe with your mom or your dad or a spouse. What's lurking beneath the surface? Paul said, put that stuff to death. In Colossians, he wrote this little letter to this church in Colossae. He says, put to death the sinful, earthly things that are lurking within you. Things like anger and rage, malicious behavior, slander, dirty language, deception. He says, don't lie to each other, for you've stripped off these things. If you're a follower of Jesus, you've stripped these things off and all of its wickedness, and you've put it to death. So just go after that stuff. And then Paul continues. I love this. He says, and put something new on instead. He continues, he says, clothe yourself with things like this: tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. It says, make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, of course, that the Lord forgave you, and so also we must forgive others. And above all, clothe yourself with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony, and let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. On New Year's Day, a whole bunch of us are going to tune out family, and we're going to lay around and we're going to watch a whole bunch of bowl games, aren't we? It's the pinnacle moment for these college athletes. And they've spent their whole lives living for this moment, to play in the Rose Bowl or the Fiesta Bowl or the Sugar Bowl. But all the practice in the world, all the hours spent watching game film and lifting weights and memorizing routes, they're all worthless unless a third team shows up for the game. And you know who it is, right? It's these guys, the officials, the referees. If they don't show up, it's chaos, right? The line judge and the back judge and the side judge and the umpire who watches the defense. You can imagine how the game would go without a referee. Guys would be like fighting and holding and offsides and trash talking and roughing the kicker, and mascots would be running wild all over the field. You take the refs out of the mix and it all just goes haywire. We've talked about this before. But it's important to remember this week that little word that Paul wrote when he said, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. That little word, rule, it actually means umpire. And what's true about the Rose Bowl is true about every single one of our lives. Without an umpire, it all just falls apart. Without someone to review the play and make the call, without a source of wisdom from which to arrange our lives, we're left to do whatever makes sense to us in that moment. Whatever gets our ball down the field, no matter what it might cost someone else. If it means tearing into a parent, or embarrassing a spouse, or throwing a coworker under the bus to prove our point or make our reputation look good, without an umpire, it seems like fair game. We act in those ways. It's why tension exists in our lives. We think that we are the referee. But the single most important decision that you'll make in your life is to allow Jesus to be the referee. Is to allow Jesus to get in there and become the umpire of your life. It's why we ask the question, who's calling the shots? This Christmas, in your family tradition, when you're all gathered together and tensions begin to rise, who's going to call the shots? Who's going to review the tape? Who's going to make the final call? You just let the peace of Christ rule this week. In all areas of your life, you just let Jesus make the call. You let him get right in the middle of the situation, right in the middle of whatever difficulty or tension you may feel. And you just pause for a moment and literally just step back. I do this all the time. Just step back and say, Jesus, help me sort this out. Jesus, what is the wise thing to do? And just give yourself a moment to reflect and listen. And you know what? I believe that God and his Holy Spirit will prompt you and teach you and lead you and guide you if you will just have a moment to pause and let him get in the middle of the situation and help you sort it out, help to call the shots. And honest, I just wonder, what if we just moved through that list in Colossians 3 this week, maybe every day this week between now and Christmas, and just asked ourselves, how are we doing in each of those areas? How can we let Jesus call the shots, rule a little bit more in each of those areas of our lives? And maybe this would be a great discipline for you this week, just to pull out Colossians 3, those verses, and just read down through and evaluate today, God, today. How am I doing in the mercy department? Am I curious about what's going on in someone else's life? Am I considering their circumstances before I react? Today, God, today, how am I doing with kindness? Would anyone say that I'm kind, that I'm a generous person emotionally, relationally? Am I quick to want to give someone else a hand? Do I act in any way that is unkind? Today, God, today, how about humility? Did I think about others before myself? Or do things always have to be my way? Am I always fighting for the last word? Did anything happen that caused me to lose it? And if so, what was the trigger? What was my part in it? How do I own that? How do I take responsibility for my responses? Today, God, how am I doing with gentleness? What's it look like in me? How about self-control? Did I lose my temper? Did I speak harshly or unkind words to anyone? Did I react impulsively? Today, just go down through that list. Today, how about patience? How do I respond when I don't get my way or when I'm feeling hurried? And how about forgiveness today? Am I holding any grudges? Am I shutting anyone out because of something I'm still holding on to from the past? And how is my faithfulness? Again, just kind of working down through that list. How is my faithfulness? Did I keep my word? Do I honor my commitments? Am I dependable? Today, would anyone describe me as loving? Did I act in any unloving ways towards anyone? Am I being unnecessarily harsh to my family around me? Do my words and my actions create division? Or do they help build bridges with others? I really do just want to encourage you. Each day this next week, just take some time to reflect on that. It might just be 10 minutes, it might be less than that, 5 minutes. And just find a good place, a nice soft chair somewhere. Maybe we're going to call this chair time, right? Every day this week, just find some chair time, just you and God. And just bow your head and work through a few questions like that. Maybe read Colossians 3 over and over and over again to yourself and just spend a few minutes asking God for clarity around any area of your life that He would want to transform. And just ask Him for courage to just let Him get in there and become the umpire and call the shots. Can you imagine what might happen in your life if you just started making a regular habit of having some chair time, just personal reflection, to pray and ask God to be with you in that way? Can you imagine how other people might begin to experience you? How they might begin to experience Jesus through you? And that really is the final question I want to leave you with, that we're going to ask this week, is what do I really want people to see in me? Before you walk through any door of any family gathering, you just ask yourself, begin with the end in mind, right? What do I really want people to see and experience in me? A couple of weeks ago, I was back home in Indiana for a family funeral. It was a